Okay. Ugh. Okay. My apologies. I had a lot going on. All right. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I do want to say that what I'm going to do is I want to, at the end of this stream, I've got a small announcement, but it's about something a second uh, fiction I'm working on, but I'm gonna save that for later on. So go ahead and get into this. I know I've missed some days and been kind of late. All right. Yeah, I had to do a lot of work to get this thing running a little bit smoother than it had been. Let's hope this works. And I also adjusted the audio so it should be better. Okay, let's see. Alright. This is a Renegade's Redemption Dusk character-driven epic fantasy by Stained Glass Threads. Contains gore and profanity. Original ongoing fantasy, tragedy, high fantasy. Okay. Got my water, so I won't be having a problem reading now. Let's see now. In a world where gods are divided into greater gods, known as crowns, and the lesser gods as hollows, Elian, god of healing and protection, is known and the most powerful and beloved of the hollows among mortals. I might even try to do that real fast. But his road into reaching this point was long and harsh, one filled with pain, loss, manipulation, and betrayal. Upon choosing Upon choosing to share this story with an idealistic mortal princess, their respective views of heroism and altruism have changed. But what is the vicious and vile sun fiend following his path? Heroes, gods, kings, all, are they not human too? Okay. Says Volume 1 is now complete, Volume 2 is in the process. Let's jump into the first chapter. Seems to have like a, wow, this guy's like really killer reviews. Okay. Seems like almost 5 across the board. Hmm. Yeah, on a little side note, this the new fiction I've been working on, ideas have just been like coming to me, and I've been waking up at like 3 in the morning for the past 2 or 3 nights, not being able to get back to sleep, and just the ideas just keep coming. So I've been extremely tired. and then I try to write it down. I fall back to sleep and I wake up late. Hmm. Good grief. All right, here we go. Okay, so we got chapter 1, our prologue, posted 10 months ago. I should have the apartment off to myself for a hot minute, so I can go a good while long without having to worry about my roommates making too much noise. What's going on? Let's see if anyone's. No one's in yet. No problem. I guess people can kind of like watch this at a later date. Ah, goodness. I knew I should have done that. Let's see. Note from the author: this is why people cry at movies, because everyone is doomed. No one in a movie can help themselves in any way. Their fate has already staked its claim for them in the moment they appear on screen. John Darnell, I suppose. Yeah, in case some of y'all haven't really been fully aware, English is not my first language. Archaic era, year 789. I like that. Monsters are real. As children, we were told that they were children of the sun fiend foot soldiers in the army of the Talon, the half-drake. Though I had my doubts, and such lowly beasts had the intelligence to obey the commands of a general, no matter how wicked or feared. Never did I doubt monster kind's existence. Word. Monster is simply what an animal is called when it has exceptionally long lifespan and magical power. It's made monsters quite valuable. Magic was the domain of only divine and the damned, not something humans could wield on their own. Many heroes of old and modern knights will go out to hunt monsters. Is that supposed to be in like Knights the Chivalry Knight or Knight the Time of Day? We have them stuffed and mounted as to have them stuffed and mounted as Trojes or fashioned powerful magic weapons. They were also valued in dispensing ingredients and magical elixirs. Many times I hunted monsters with my fellow knights. Okay, it is knights. Many times I returned home with to my wife and children, exhausted but satisfied. Trophy firm in hand, over time I amassed quite a collection, including armor and sword crafted from monster bones, and this meant that it was yet another simple monster hunt. As was our custom, we filed into the location tavern to collect information of our quarry and celebrate their imminent victory. Sir Nash, bless his soul, stood unnaturally stiff and awkward in the tavern. He was new to his position as a knight, but still obsessively polishing his armor, and tripped over himself to recall formal address. It's bad luck to drink before a victory, he said. We should try to keep our heads unclouded by alcohol. How do you land that pretty wife of yours with that stick in your ass? I laughed uproariously and shoved a mug into Nash's hands. Annette was a sweet thing, pretty and frail, but far too sensitive. And Nash was a good lad, but it was hard to think of him as truly deserving of her. You worry too much, boy. Demons are just old wives' tales, the ramblings of an old coot. That's what monsters tell their children, to tell them to keep them out of the woods at night. Don't scare the boy too much, another knight added. He might fear old Talon will whisk him away for being naughty. Maybe if prey is hard enough, Hollow Alien will appear to save him. We laughed and toasted, our cheeks growing redder with alcohol as Nash grew redder with embarrassment. Fools. Demons are real, a voice roared. My eyes snapped to the newcomer, expecting an aged fool. Instead, he was young, his face pale and his eyes dark and haunted. I saw the demon with my own eyes. It passed by me like a wraith. You're sure it wasn't your grandma? Another knight blurted out. We all chuckled. The pale boy grew more livid. No, but maybe I saw yours back to scold you for your incompetence, he spat. Incompetence, boy? The knight rose to his feet and drew his bastard sword. We'll see how incompetent you are in a duel. Sir Blake, Sir Knight, Nash snapped. Calm yourself. You'd strike people we're here to protect? I'd strike an impotent little rat. Now, Sir Blake, I sighed. Planted a hand on my friend's shoulder. You'll get the chance to show this young lad your wisdom and bravery instead of laying low a boy who's barely become a man. Shall we show him the benevolence of the knights and slay whatever beast he thought he saw? Surely by morning he'll be singing your praises instead. Huh, Sir Blake grunted and sheathed his sword again. Fine, lead us to the demon, boy. Barely had the night begun, and already 3 of our little party were seething with rage. I only prayed we could finish the mission swiftly, but I could leave this backwater waste and return to my loving wife's embrace. The boy from the tavern, Muriel, instead led us deep into the local woods. Long had the light of the 2 suns faded, and into a cacophony of tree branches eclipsed the light of the moon and stars. The entire environment was cast in a gloomy air, but we appeared immune to it. Recklessly we laughed and joked as our torches seemed to turn out the tree's shadow into a dancing demon. Often these jokes came at the expense of Morel, who stalwartly ignored us, his face set in the expression of grim determination. We pressed onwards, not even clinging briars from the undergrowth, and the devious roots that threatened to trip us could slow him. We laughed at the harder of his resolution. Only a boy could take mere rumors seriously. When our torches went all out at once, our laughter was abruptly silenced. I heard Blake chuckle anxiously in the darkness. Without torchlight, it was now so dark I could not even see my hand. Not even it Not even if it was inches from my face. A chill set in. Creeping along my spine. "Run, little boy," a devil on my shoulder seemed to whisper. "And hid beneath your bed, perhaps this horror will pass you by." I shrugged off the passing fear. "Squire, relight the torches," I commanded, but no noise escaped my throat. My eyes darted around the darkness, seeking to identify the pale faces of my allies, but I saw nothing. And then I saw it, a demon, the thing that should not have existed, with the gaping wound in the world. Darker than darkness, the beast was black on black. Sorry. He spilled ink, spreading across the ocean's lightless waters. A frigid winter wind left me frozen on the spot. It seemed to kill the forest around it. No, it would more accurately say that it erased the forest around it. For all my senses could glean, it had dragged us into the dark, frightful void. Morel's sharp gasp cut the silence, reminding me of the others. The sound of footsteps followed as the boy tried to flee. I felt rather than saw the creature pursue him in a cold rush of stillness. The boy whimpered and then fell silent. No scream, no crunches, no tearing of flesh to be heard. Somehow this was worse. I had heard these things. I would have known in my heart that Morel was no more, a definite conclusion to his sad and sorry life, but there was none, only an indecisive trailing off. Silence. Dr. Nash, Sir Nash raised his sword and exclaimed a hearty battle cry. "In the name of the king," he cried. Some of our allies must have advanced him, and I heard armored-clad footsteps. "In the name of the crown, Naroon, in the name of—" The cry died in his throat, the breath stolen from his lungs. Sound of clanking armor died too. Even those who could flee, such as Morel, seemed to vanish from the soundscape. There were no sounds of animals, insects, or night birds. Perhaps we had not been so cocky and loud. We have noticed how wrong the forest truly was. No blood spattered the ground, no bodies strewn around me. I was alone, with no proof of the world beyond or those who had accompanied me this far. Perhaps they had survived. Perhaps they still had abandoned me as a cruel prank. Perhaps we had gathered into the forest's edge, a pale face in grim preparation, a report to the king. There was now no demon. There was and their fool companion had passed out in the tavern in a puddle of saliva and bravado. Perhaps I was spent in entirety in the dark, alone, too cowardly to fight or flight. I was a child again, cowering beneath my blanket at my mother's stories. No, if I was to be stuck in a story, I would use it all the lessons I had learned all of my life and survive. I would be clever, daring, bold. The spells seemed to break, and I fled. And then the demon was upon me. I could no longer feel my arm. It began as pins and needles in my fingers, but swiftly became a hard cold marching up my hand and forearm. I could not even gasp or whisper like Morel and my compatriots. Ridiculously, my mind drifted away to my mother's stories. A hero was always clever, though. Just strong enough to trick the enemy who crossed their paths. How could one bargain with nothingness, with the concept of icy death? How could one overpower it? Perhaps a hero, certainly a god, but the wool had been removed from my eyes. I was neither. My eyes shut as the chill reached my shoulder, but then a brilliant golden light penetrated my eyelids. I looked and saw an angel had fallen to earth. It was a demon, and this demon was the darkness and cold. He wielded light and warmth. Red and golden light answered his call, in which he used to trade blows with the demon. No, he was not merely holding his ground, he was winning. I tried to follow their fight, but mortals are not meant to observe the attacks. Just as a migraine gripped my brain with unconsciousness. When I awoke next, I had a laden weight on my chest. The feathers and feathers sticking to my nose. Massive avian face clad in red and gold feathers glazed down upon me. I blinked. It blinked back. Strange. It could have sworn my savior appeared less bird-like than this. I struggled to free myself under it. Hey, they're easy. The two broad heads gently swooped the beast away from me, and another face came into view. It was difficult to discern the forest's dark gloom, but two golden pupils faintly illuminated the features. The man who saved me was a god. Stories immediately flooded my mind with a doubt. The man was Halo-Ilian, the turtle god. Known by all as the god of healing and protection, he who watches the sleeping and defenseless. Thousands of bards across their years told tales in taverns and castle halls. Hundreds of times I'd heard of his tale. My mind quickly made the connection and realized the immense bird must have been his trusty phoenix steed, Krim. Demons, gods, phoenixes. Had I truly wandered into a tale of old, would I appear next to me vampires and hell itself? My lord, Halo-Ilian, I gasped. Thank you for... Don't talk, he said firmly and gently. Don't worry about titles either. This ain't the time for the place for titles. I thank you, I stuttered. No need for either, he said, with a smile. He said, and an easy smile on his face. All must be well if he is smiling. My anxious pounding heart began to slow, and my gaze drifted to my numb arm. Then my heart stopped altogether. It was gone, all gone. No muscle, not even bone remained. Had you told me I had been born without an arm, I might have believed you. My mouth opened to scream, but only a hoarse gasp escaped my throat. Don't panic. The demon's gone now, and he won't hurt you anymore. Halo-Ilian instructed. Breathe. Just breathe, okay? You can heal it, can't you? I asked suddenly. The silence of my companions and their disappearance returned to my mind. Cold sweat gathered in my brow, and I came here with other knights. There were 6 of us in total. I'll look for them. I'll handle it, he said. But there's nothing more I can do for you now. Take a deep breath through your nose, then out of your mouth. I obeyed. Though I did little to permanently dispel the fear, it allowed me to regain rationality and calm. What manner of magic is this? I glanced at my missing arm, hoping the magic had somehow affected it. Alas, it remained gone. No magic. It's something anyone can do. Listen. Halo-Ilian pressed a leather pouch into my palm and clinked. It clinked as I clutched it. There are wounds even gods can't heal. We all have our limits. I can't give you back your arm. What I can do is give you enough money that you'll be set for life when you return home. You have family? Kids? Yes, 3. Uther, Ethrel, and Joyce, and my wife. Uther's begun his training as a squire. Good. Don't go to sleep. Keep thinking of them. Tell Krim about them. He picked me up, bringing me to the enormous bird, with the size of a broad-shouldered man. I blinked at it again, and it blinked back. Tell your steed, the monster? I asked. He deposited me upon its back. Yep, he said. The monster, a lot smarter than you think. Smarter than some gentry I've met. He'll get you home safely. But what about my party? I was sending out messages, telling local knights and lords to prioritize protecting towns and villages over hunting a demon, and that I would deal with this on my own, but my messages must have missed you, or maybe. He shook his head, a few hairs from his braid coming down loose. It doesn't matter. Knights being here complicates things, so I'll keep an eye out for your compatriots or signs of them, but right now, my priority needs to be tracking down a demon. If I can't find it, then once dawn breaks, tell the villagers and tell your lord it's safe to search the forest for them. You won't be left in the dark. It seemed unfair. The demons seemed to punish those who fought and fled alike. Why had it spared me? Why had Halo-Ilian come to save the brave men who tried to slay it? Perhaps I could have joined them in the charge, The crown Narun would welcome us together into her embrace, then I would not be forced to accept how I was no hero, undeserving of my titles. He seemed to sense my inner turmoil and reached out to pat my shoulder. Come to Krim with your legs. Hold on tight to Krim with your legs. Your wife and child would rather have you back alive than on your shield. I met his gaze. Are you certain? The dead deserve to be honored, but they can't help anyone anymore. You may never be a warrior again, but you can still be a husband and a father, can't you? He turned on his heel and walked off into the woods, picking his way around the thickets of the undergrowth. And, hey, I'm sure this'll make one hell of a story. You can't tell those when you're dead. His phoenix took off with me. He was right. When I returned home, my children cried to see me. My wife was enraged, but they held me tight. Even after Holothien returned, Nash's young sweetheart had nothing to hold. He sat by her side. He gave her and the other widows enough money to support them. The god's appearance to our kingdom should have been a happy occasion, but most spent it doing nothing but weeping. Many begged me to share my story of how I survived. I did not doubt Holothien had made it a good story. Demons, gods, phoenixes, great and terrible matched by a great and wondrous good. The bards would have sung it for generations upon generation, had I ever told it. But each time I opened my mouth, my tongue froze, and a winter's chill stole my breath. The dancing shadows of bar patrons became dark demons. Beneath the chatter and laughter of dinner with friends, I heard a quiet whimpers and gasps. I was alive. I had survived, but there was no storybook hero. My tale deserved a proper hero. One more brave, more daring, more cunning. The story happened around me as I stood frozen. I had not survived by my own effort, but through sheer luck. In truth, it could have been anyone else. Pretty good. Alright. Yeah, I can see how that gets 5 stars. I won't go too heavily into like a review, but I can appreciate how that kind of went from like just to the point. Um, let's see. Let's see reputation. Okay. Let's see what. When I figure out how, that's not what I wanted to do. When I figure out how, I will, what? You wanna, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna do timestamps for the, live stream. Free promotion sounds sublime, absolutely fathom cute. Okay, let's see. Unfathomably cute, alright, reading. Part 2. Part 2. Okay. Cool. Alright, let's read Unfathomably Cute. Let me try something. Copy link address. I'm going to try to. Let's see. Let's go with Brave. So with Brave, search engine, I guess. Okay. Let's see if this one's faster. Seems like it. We'll see. Okay, ongoing action adventure psychological. Unfathomably Cute by Screw Logic Amphab. Alright. You gotta say the whole thing. Brooke thought she had finally gotten used to a world where entities beyond her understanding fought to end or preserve humanity. She believed in the strength of the Vanguard, modern-day superheroes granted incredible power via contracts with the Eldritch. She feared that she would have no part of any of it. It would be a far above her and she could ordinary life. She was wrong. Alright. Chapter 1, Nickel Wise. 12 days ago. Okay, 4 stars. I notice this is a little bit faster, so I may use this more often. This more often, but again, we'll see. Let's see. Thanks. I have my habit of putting my feet upon the dash when I'm in the car. The position is terrible for my posture, but there's something incredibly comfortable about feeling one's car fan blow upon my feet as I prop my phone on my thighs. My mom hates it and honestly tried her best to dissuade me when I was younger, but alas, I am a slave to comfort. Now she just makes a funny scrunch face whenever she sees me doing it and wipes the dash down with Clorox wipes when I'm gone. Don't blame her. When I was younger, I found her obsession with germs to be annoying, but I suppose I prefer her to be a germaphobe rather than a freak about various horrors of today, as everyone else seems to be. I look out the window, the surrounding city as boisterous and cramped as I used to, but nowadays the spiraling sharp architecture is far from the square and boxy landscapes I saw as a kid. I'm sure some Vanguard's weird aesthetics had something to do with it, though it's not like we have rebuilt. Though it's not like we'd have rebuilt, let alone survive without them. Well, so far, those of us who did survive, there's not much military to go against the Eldritch hordes, so I can forgive the strange taste of a few Vanguards and tell them off their steeds. Suddenly, shuddering involuntarily, I blink away the images and subjects brings to my mind. Repression of one's emotions is pretty common nowadays. The life is really normal. It is because of the Vanguard. Somehow, all of them seem to have a mile-long altruistic streak and dedicated unexpectedly with an unfathomable power that comes with societal reforms and free healthcare. I heard that there was a political resistance at first, but when the women in frilly green dresses hangs over her car-sized lizard mouth and promises a permanent solution to your energy and housing problems, arguing might be the last thing on your mind. Banishing that train of thought before it sucks me in again, I turn my mother's understanding gaze, who clearly knows what I'm about to ask. We're going to pass Benny's on the way home. It would be a crime not to pick up... Let's see. We're going to pass Benny's on the way home. It would be a crime not to pick up any, I said. Like it being the way home makes any difference. Even with our so-called optimally Desi Road roads, You need to make a U-turn and get to Benny's parking lot. My mom pursed her lips and twisted them, supposedly thinking hard about something she'd already decided before I even asked. Well, let's see. If such a hassle pulling in there. Besides, Brooke don't have the pickles and peanut butter at home. Don't we have pickles and peanut butter at home? She responds by making an exaggerated gag face to make fun of my snack choice, like it isn't the greatest food combo in the world. Heathens who've tried a great ambrosia of pickle butter have no right disrespecting the blessed flavor, and no, we are out. I ate all the pickles yesterday, I shouted back defiantly. Not an ounce of shame in my tone. Her grimace almost makes me break character and giggle, but I kept my chest puffed and my arms crossed. Alright, fine, we can drop by Benny's on the way back and of the bank, but you have to go in and get the text for your brother and fathers to see if they want any. Your father is the prettiest man on the planet, and we don't want to bring back snacks, I swear. Woo, I cheered enthusiastically. Despite fully knowing she'd cave, I gave her a side hug, careful not to jostle her while she was driving before I pulled out my phone to text Dad and brother. My background is the picture of my mom and me from a month ago when we dropped by the mall. We look relatively alike, though her brown hair is starting to give away gray at the base, and she keeps hers shorter than mine. I typed in my password, pulled out the Messenger app to text in family chat rather than individually message them. Convinced the ice cream warden to part with her treasures. I know you want butterscotch, Dad. Want anything, Victor? I said, seeing my father's ominously fast and cryptic response. Acquire the cream. My brother slightly after. Sorbet for me and hurry home. I refuse to be stuck in a house alone with Dad when he's expecting ice cream. My father's single frog emoji respond was confusing as it was telling, and I tell my mom what they said, frog and all. She laughs, and I can't help but feel thankful for Dad. Things have been tough for everyone for a long time now, as he's always kept us together, even through the little embarrassing times. He's been there for us despite it being just as tough on him. When the city got run down about a decade ago, he lost the most out of all of us. And not just financially. He apparently used to have friends on the police force, good ones, from what he told me. And then when Fathom first arrived, before the Vanguard set up, the cops were our first and last defense. They took heavy losses in those first few hours, and still haven't recovered fully since. My dad hides this well, but I know it eats him sometimes. No matter how goofy he is, I reapply my flattering smile and blink quickly a few times, banishing the train of thought as I swear my mom cursed softly in traffic. You'd think people would drive better with these new fancy roads, but no, there's somehow even worse. And bless the shield, but damn it, it's only worse as this headache. Upon hearing her complaint, I looked past her transparent dome of energy encircling our city, and admittedly frustrating. It applies to everything, especially when I'm taking pictures. It's almost impossible to get good lighting, though I certainly won't be hard complaining about it. Not just because it literally keeps the Fathom out, but some people can get a little touchy when it comes to the Vanguard. Our defenders have a cult following of sorts. A lot of religious types, when confronted with with their morality, decide that their fervor needed a more down-to-earth outlet. I sway sli- I sway slightly, turn into the bank parking lot at this slight incline. Even with my mom slowing down, I can't help but lean into the center console. A small plaza when we have our bank similar to the rest of the city. The obsidian smooth roads and tall pointed shops twisted like conch shells on a black glass beach. She smoothly pulls into a shaded parking lot space opposite of the bank, locking the car. You can stay in the car if you like. I won't be gone for a few minutes to cash these checks, she says, stepping out of the curb. Yeah, the bank's too scruffy, and they stop offering Jolly Ranchers, so I'll pass. Alright, I'll leave the keys in the cup holder if you need the AC, and open the car for anyone. Mom, I'm 22. Just go to the bank. I'm not gonna get kidnapped. Yeah, I suppose they'll just return you anyway, she jabs back, sticking her tongue out as she closed the door. I huff and lay down in my seat, the consolation that my restraint will be rewarded with ice cream, bolstering my attitude. No satisfaction was worth the risk of me missing out on Benny's. A squirrel lands on the hood of the car, making me jump slightly as it started connecting the acorns trapped under our windshield wipers and showing them to its cheeks. Quickly, I pulled out my phone's photo app and wanting to miss out in a shot like that. He struggles to fit in a particularly large acorn in his mouth, and I line up the shot, trying to acquire the filter for the dome saturation, but it keeps changing. Wait, why would it be fluctuating? I lower my phone and open the car door, looking into the sky. I watch the shield dissolve before my eyes. Saturation is visibly fading. I can see particles falling from the dome. My heart grips my heart. In every nightmare I've ever seen, the first innovation plays through my head. My breathing hitches and I look towards the bank. Even I have to get to my mom. We have to get for safety. I close the door behind me as I run towards the bank, and but already know I'm too late. The thin buzzing feel surrounds and blocks my hands and grips the handles. I'm hyperventilating, looking through the grass. I see my mom sprinting towards the door. As she tries to hear it open, I hear the bolt click behind the barrier, keeping it locked. She's yelling. I can faintly hear it as she grabs the security guard's shirt and begs him to undo the barrier. I know he can't, and she does too. All shields are monitored by vanguards to avoid tampering. My vision's blurry, and I can barely hear her screaming for me to get to the bunker. I nod and back up, my mind's full of images and of corpses of those who didn't make it to the shelters last time. Vision swimming. I turn and run to the car, pulling a handle of the driver's side door, noticing all too late that it's locked and the key still sitting up the cup holder with my mom left. I frantically slam my elbow into the window and break it but wince as I hurt myself set off the car alarm. The blaring of the alarm jolts me out of my fugue slightly as I force myself to think rationally. I have to get inside, preferably not one of the bunkers, but all the other buildings that are going to be locked down tight. As I zero in on my surroundings, I notice my phone has been beeping in the pocket this whole time. When I pull it out, a map of city with arrows guiding me to shelters takes over the screen. I gloss over the fact that the Vanguard somehow has the ability to take over my cell phone and start following the closest arrow towards the bunker, beneath one of the parks, about half a mile away. I see smoke rising from the distance, but I know, thankfully, that none of the creatures are causing it. There shouldn't be too many fathom in too many fathom in the city if the shield only fell, and I'm at least a few miles from the sea away where I usually comes across. As long as I'm fast, I should be there. When I have to close the blasting door, I cut through the gas station, shaving precious seconds off my time when I hear whimpering voices call out, "Help, please, something bit me. I can't use my leg anymore." I immediately crouch behind the car, the parked car on the side of the road, its driver nowhere to be seen, heart pounding in my chest. I see over the trunk towards where I heard the voice. I see a woman crawling out from behind a building, her dress bloody, her hands dirty from dragging herself along them. I hear a skid on concrete and turned to see a man approaching her while crouching, its head swiveled, looking for what I could have gotten her. He reaches her and whispers something I can't hear before extending her a hand out to her. He smiles brightly before wrapping her arms around his torso and squeezing, the snapping of his bones audible from where she's lifted off the ground. She's revealing herself, and she reveals herself to be the end of a long tail attached to the car monstrously that hangs above a gaping maw. My body freezes, unable to comprehend what just happened as I dropped into the Fathom's mouth. As I watch him drop to the Fathom's mouth, I hear an ordinary whimper from my traitorous body and shut my mouth while covering it with my hand. Am I supposed to get past that thing? The woman on its tail almost killed him on her own. Horrifying, isn't it? I hear from behind me. I turn and expect human head, but there is the rest of the body missing. And expect a human head, but is there, but the rest of the body is missing altogether. Instead, his neck keeps going, extended like a rubbery hose, until the other side connects the sewer drain next to me. We made that one by hand. I think we've finally gotten the voice right for the puppet. It's only smart enough to say the one thing, though we all have our faults. I can't scream. I swear I try, and I manage to crack my voice despite the fact that my body is screaming flight. I simply cannot bring myself to move. My legs wobble. Stop holding me up, and my tears stream down my face. Excellent reaction. We cannot wait to see what sort of beautiful art we can make of you our clay. It shudders it's far too wide, grinning, shifting of its feathers by poorly fitting rubber mask. As his sombering threats makes its way into my ears, I regain control of my limbs and scramble myself. I stumble over my feet and try to run, knocking myself into the car and just barely staying upright. As soon as I recover, it shoots ahead of me, wrapping its hose-like neck around my legs and sending me tumbling to the glossy street. I reach down and pry it off, but it pulls me towards the storm drain. I panic further, my fingernails finding no purchase on these accursedly smooth streets. My knees and elbows scrape against the storm drain. I barely fit in. My forearm slams against and everything goes dark. Okay, I know I said I really wouldn't do go heavily into reviews, but and that's mainly because I don't want people to I want people to make up their own minds. So I'll just keep that at I was having trouble figuring out what was going on. There was I don't know if I had no idea what was going on. I was lost most of the time reading that. So I'm sorry to say that. I'm not saying it's bad. That's just one thing I am going to say about that. I had a lot of trouble reading that. I may do. I will probably at some point do like an actual uh, do an actual like thorough breakdown where I read a story in full. Um, yeah, let me know if y'all want me to kind of like do if there's a story you all want me to read more thoroughly, like from like stop to bottom kind of thing. You know, first chapter to the final chapter. Okay. Let's see. Copy link address. And let's see. Also, if there you know, I plan to do some where it's like I actually give a thorough feedback, or like you know, and keep in mind my feedback is just my opinion, so it's not you know, take that with my opinion with a grain of salt, please. Let's see. Let's see. Is this the correct one? Rain Harrow. Okay, Rain Harrow. Okay, let's see. Original, ongoing, action, adventure, fantasy. This contains gore, profanity, traumatizing content. Chaos Slinger by Rain Harrow. Is this the one you want me to read? It's the I think it's the only one that there is. So it might be interesting to do. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can. Let's give this thing a little bit of time to run. This is number 3, I think. Yep. Actually, I will kind of follow, say this to that last one I read. Let me scroll up if I can find it. The Unfathomably Cute story. Um, this again, you know, just take this with a grain of salt, but it's for me. I find it better to focus on things that bring something to the story. It's not. There's nothing wrong with details. The question is, how do those details? What do those details do for the plot? What do they do for the story? So, you know, details are kind of need to give you kind of like an idea of things. It's nothing wrong. I mean, it's nothing wrong with writing about you know me and mom driving around and you know like driving around and you know going to the bank or whatnot, and you know me talking to my father and such or my brother. Um, but when you know writing things about every you know every when you don't need to be have include every little detail, just the details that are important. You know because it was I as the world as you were revealing the world as you were revealing that world to me, I was like, okay, pretty much it was like I put a puzzle piece down And then when you gave me something else, I had to remove that first puzzle piece and figure out how those two and figure out, okay, how do these two connect together? And it's either the puzzle pieces were like very far apart and I didn't know where they went, or I didn't know how to connect them. And when they did connect, I was like, okay, which way do they go? So again, it wasn't. I'm not saying it was bad. It just I had a hard time following because I. Okay, so this one is by Rain Harrow. Participant in the Royal Road Rideathon Challenge. Long ago, a mystical figure forged paths to the realm in advanced civilization to heights undreamed. Built on the foundations of technology, science, and mysterious aberrant power, only fractions were born to wield. One such companion became the greatest of all, who led people to a golden age, a wonder forging science mystery burning into one. But a figure ascended or abandoned the realms or died. Depending on who you asked, the people could not bear the loss of their god, and soon they became lost. So a great society of these many realms waned, inevitably fell, disaster and war causing spiral, dragging civilization to the brink of annihilation. Perhaps the pit of hell. Alright. Okay. Let me go ahead and get to it. Yeah, I do think Brave is working a little bit faster. Seems to, anyway. Now it seems like it's lagging. I don't know. Could be the storm. We've been having really bad storms over here. Okay. Chapter 1, The Gravity of Divine Gods. Good grief. I hate it when it clicks on the wrong thing. So apparently this has like a 5-star review. Alright. Chapter 1. The Gravity of Divine Gods. Chaos Slinger by Rain Harrow. Alright. I didn't backtrack, shut up. What the? Note, this is assumed they are speaking another language, but is translated in English. For the most part, a fairly small matter, but one of the biggest things would be song and poetry not rhyming. Every aspect is not religiously adhered to the consequences. So, okay, so, sounds like, okay, okay, cool. So, let's see. Okay, I like this. Gives a breakdown of how the words are used. Appreciate that. I kind of want to do something like this with myself because like the dark fantasy pulp I'm working on is the dark fantasy pulp I'm working on. There's languages that I'm developing, and there's like there's variations of the language, so it's kind of like you have a kind of like slang. You have a more common tongue, and then you have an advanced tongue. And the more advanced the more advanced you are in language or understanding the language, this plays part in kind of like the magic system that I've worked on. Okay, chapter 1. The gravity of divine gods. 3 moons of Helamon were on display as dimly lit pre-dawn sky. The reddish glow of eastern horizon faded in a gradient to the cool blade and inevitably a cold void above. The meager stars superspread within it seemed to wait in anticipation for the warm embrace that was slowly engulfing them, or so Daros imagined. Surely the spirits of the sky felt the cold and felt that he did. Actually, hold on, I want to see something real fast. Because, Daros. So Daros imagined, surely the spirits of the sky felt the cold a hundredfold that he did. It was an idle, fanciful thought for a time, like when he risen and early to arrange, wrapped in a heavy blanket atop the sandy slope of the canyon that was his home. He chose the spot to avoid the worst of the wind higher up while still giving the benefit of a glorious view, and thus was chosen observation point from the heavens. That morning it was all to see with the 3 speaking sisters at the sky at once. Okay. As the old stories went, 3 sister moons, Nimara, Diterma, and Ginopa, I hope I said that right, roamed the heavens in search for their 2 lost brothers, Kalink and Ogeris. This kind of reminds me of Greek a little bit, so I could be mistaken. Who wandered far to the distant skies beyond the northern sky that the Talentia people lived under. Though the dark voids through Kermas and the spiral, and through the domain of the Lightbringer Azerom, they searched across the shifting cosmos to their continual vein as all god moons. The spirits they touched were not of their blood, such colorful tales like phantasms of Daros, young youthful wonder. As much as he believed them then, he saw far different things looking to the sky past adolescence. Hamelin orbited the star Azerom, and all its system orbited Keramus. Their galaxy was full of stars, fiery orbs, a matter of rather than spirits. The three sisters weren't gods, but huge rocks, more or less. They were, and the 2 brothers were orbiters of the northern sky, implied never hosted. Skies further south did, in fact, so the claims went. So many pale fires played their game of woods, rather than whether gods by their hand within, or whether none could say, though ever did those beneath try to divine, perhaps to hope, regardless they ever did the one thing in abundance watch. In the pre-cold dawn, Nimra and Dithra could have seen just above gently sloping a higher ice into the south and to the southwest respectively, where Daros could barely regard them both at the same time. They were small, irregular shapes with cast a Swedish glow high above them. Genopa roamed the sky vaguely a white disk. Daros's eyes were mostly drawn to Mithra's. It was slowly but perceptibly descending towards the horizon. It was both rare and common sense to see, as every 9 hours would briefly peak above, or perhaps 20 minutes. Dithra, in contrast, would cross over 4 hours in Genopa. While she was called the Wandering Sister for good reason, she likely soared above all day. Everything of the cosmos and its cosmology he learned from observation. Old man Tephesius, most commonly known by the simple honorific Aethra, technically nearly every Teldec learned from Aethra and his appearances in their youth, but only a handful really took it away, to a few indeed, such as Daros did. As he was a child, he'd been proud and adamant that he was not 18 calendars or years old, but 21 orbital and of 109 days. While acute, though the first of his continual corrections eventually became tiresome for his elders, enough to get him scalded for abstinence, particularly by his mother. The threat of missing out the feast day was punishment, even which had everything to do with the calendar, but little to do with the orbital period that had changed his tune. Somewhat away he became 19 calendars or 21 orbitals old, a reasonable promise of which he had continued to 37 or 42 at last change, well into young adulthood. Okay. Being quite a favorable of Daros had much inclined to become an apprentice. Though his father doubted the degree which would persist, he merely said, "Learn all you can, son." Of that, everything else he tried, but his youthful energy had been interrupted, first by a terrible illness that gripped all of the Miracle Spring Canyons and killed many, and then by the miracle of its own, what blossomed after his fortuitous studies. He was one of blessed, though he was grateful for it. The gods of his ancestors, those who chance and matter, he still saw pretty enviously to those who became one of Abra's apprentices. Mere human nature, he told himself, as he watched Nimra die behind the dark and dissolent sandy slope, to pine after that which we cannot have. No doubt Nimra would wish to roam the sky higher than fingers width, or Genopa, that she finally bumped into things, her brothers, and her endless mandering. Azom might wish, or is it Azum? I'm read it as Azaram. Azaram might wish to rise in the west, but they would all be flights of fancy, as were his musings about naming new cosmoids or having his nose in the book with his eyes on the stars. Well, the last would always be true, and the hells with any who told him otherwise. And to hells with any who told him otherwise. Okay. As he shifted over Dithra, he recalled a question he'd asked old Typhus as a child: "Can we walk on the moons, Abra?" he asked, to which the old stargazer had simply and patiently replied, "I'm afraid that sand, rock, and soil of Hamilton is only gravity. Either way is bumbling around in my boy. Either of us is bumbling around in my boy." One more dream dead to cold, harsh reality, he thought in mock seriousness. To his child self, he has a crushing blow, but beyond that, shifting his perch, he turned his head on his blanket cushion, backing to the east of immense rise of Azerom. Presaged by the intensifying blend of colors reemerging in the sky, he found the colors of dawn somehow indescribable, but surely beautiful, perhaps the best way to wake up and begin one's day, though in truth he'd awoken, if one could call it that, earlier, out of a more comfortable bed and braved the cold to make the climb. Thankfully, his mount did most of the work on four spirited legs, motivated by beloved threats, but he had unfortunately done little for Daros' own wakefulness. He almost dozed off several times since waiting on the moons, with an occasional deeper bite of the cold on his face while being the difference. The night and early morning were always cold as such, especially at altitude, but the winter had an extra bite to it. The winter was generally welcome, as it became storms of rain only seen after a year. The last was no exception. With the very rare and quite celebrate two large storms which flared in the canyon, its slopes, and well beyond the life, the most recent storm had been but a week hence, since the sandy soils had roughly absorbed it, but after the effects were there in evidence with uncommon green in every direction for the first year. It was as if spring had already arrived. If one's eyes weren't keen from the differences, certain fruits such as the hairy pole, still green, for instance, it could be ripe enough soon, though. As the eastern glow intensified and the light began to cast into the canyon valley, as at many homes and structures, it was obvious that a large number of the populace had the same idea of enduring the cold and getting the day going. It was no wonder, as the canyon was significantly warmer and, depending on the season, would get unbearable after some time, fall from the southern crossing of the east to west. Shade time, or surrender, as it was called. Around that time, or before, it would be taking breaks and sleeping a bit before the variable burst of activity to finish out the workday. In the winter, daylight was significantly reduced, and Azerom's height above the horizon at least, so more citizens tended to maximize or skip surrender, and further utilizing the longer twilight periods to compensate. As Daros gazed out, he could see the tiny figures of farmers in the desolance tending crops. Eel catchers overloading boats, and children fetching water, most with oil lanterns or torches for extra light. The excited squeals of Alagoa, mounts of a beast of burden, and to Teldeca, echoed up the canyon faintly as they escorted around the graves of the wild goba bug mounds. His own Agola up the slope seemed to stir and grunt occasionally, but most insurers bruised himself, stiffing around for his own crawling morsels, with a long tapered snout, probably tonguing every rock and slope twice in the process. Daros paid him no mind. He's not a wonder, far despite his inclinations. With the smell of the threat bag around his master, he begged a few times to no avail, but precisely because of giving it, he started wandering for food or complaining about being anchored to prevent it. The full lure of promise was truly the best compromise for Darrow's peace. As opposed to laboring along water, Daros Literon was one of the Akazan, the warrior scouts and hunters of Teledeca that kept this canyon safe from raiding predation. His mount was one of many trappings of such status as was his bow, spear, and one of the blessed he had marked for it. It was inevitable that the light of Azeron, despite his talents in the arena without that of average, or that advantage were average at best to his mind. The blessed were said to walk half in the world of the gods and half in the world of mortals. Daros wasn't sure about that. From his perspective, they simply cheated reality in small ways. His and other most blessed variations were simply sensory improvised that had the far sense of that it was called, which amounted to some vaguely like extended sense of touch outward. It was starved by fine details, but shape, motion, and distance could be gleaned, often supplementing other senses strongly, particularly that seemed to happen slightly faster, though brain bending and disorienting without training. Eventually someone's reactions were improved, while far sensing, which required conscious dogmeter or opening oneself up to the supposed hidden world. The maker, as it was like a flow spinning through all matter, tremendously heavier around others doing the same. It was heavier around Maricosida, the intensification of Makadar, until it touched the ephemeral realms and drew in a pulling wider senses closer, like gravity pulling at matter. Darrow could draw dissonant scenes closer to his eyes like the telescope and draw sounds similarly, making them essentially more acute, and he in essence cheated the material around with advantages of information. On the other hand, it took years to make use and decades, if not a lifetime, to perfect. He had been accounted a rather quick study, but he had made no sense an expert. The children and heralds of Azerom, the fireball planets, Vramar and Charius, rose shortly before the Lightbringer himself crested the horizon. Brightly began, having enjoyed a slew of rises. Darrow finally rose with them out of the blankets that stretched and shivered, even in his black fur coat. I don't know why I keep saying black. Even in his fur coat. It would be some time before the temperature warmed much. He at least warm up a little in the way across the heights of Bloodbound Buff, the mountainous features that overlooked the heart of Miracle Springs, the old residence that carved out the surface, mostly the lower half and top house fortress. The latter was general headquarters of the Akazan, with his destination, though it was likely that he'd quickly sent out to hunt games solo and opportunistically. This was not a training day, which was 2 out of the 5 day. He almost always came back with meat for the pots. I could really use some spice cider, he was thinking desperately as he shook his blanket in the air and rolled it up tightly. The spices used were trapped from a far south, and some buildings were there that had burned down. According to rumor, the local brews were not a shadow as good to him, and notoriously variable in their punch. The last thing he wanted in the bloody morning was to get drunk. He came up as he caught sight of something to the east, highlighted by the blunting light, smoke, or dust at such a distance it was barely perceivable even to his sharp eyes, but clearly filtering up from somewhere far below the slope he was on, possibly from the bottom of the canyon and the riverbed. Well, that's one way to wake up. He activated Dawmaker with a flick, a blink, a blink, a jolt of his mind, and felt the ensuing rush of adrenaline spike through his body, making him more awake and alert almost instantly. As he did so, he flared out the Maker in arcs around him, making loosely spherical radius of the far side. He felt the flood of information take form, and he was reaching out with many hands. Felt the contours of the slope, the varying rocks, scattered vegetation. Felt the vague form of ensnares above and behind him. Felt the flow of the wind and the dust. It was a simple act for him, all the simpler where it was needed, and particularly there was an alarm. With his bearings achieved a Maker, he performed an intense concentration of it. Was the Megasoda. In front of his eyes, focused on the vision, on the distinct point. When concentrating on pulling it closer, the intricate manipulation, magnitudinous, tight energetic flows. He scarcely continuously focused on the minute movements, however. They were second nature to him, like the muscles of fingers working on a plucked harp strings. Light subtly distorted the air around for the moment, blurred, and he turned and came into focus, all the matter of the moment. Dust was following up in a roughly horizontal lip and a distant slope that blocked his view and the rest of the desolation. He couldn't see the riverbed, not even close, but the path of the line was following what he knew to be the dry sand of the lowest point. By all appearances, one or more readers were galloping at breakneck speed down the convenient path. If no one coming from the east was likely to be a threat, there was, as was the dust, not great, nor were their horns being blown. Nonetheless, a speeding rider was rather unusual. The rider's path would heavily lead to the river's end and less hospitable terrain for any approach, and to a community hub. It usually overgrown with weeds and cane, but it was also bloated with water tanks. In short, its desperately cultivated bastion-like role for when the water rose. The best way up the consulted path on the slope instead was graded by the highest point by the small fort and watchtower called Easthold, whose top Daros could barely see from his vantage. Change of plans. There was no way he was going to investigate. Quickly releasing the Megasoda was trying the blanket roll with a cord. He packed up the others he used as a headrest, as well as his spear, and darted towards the slope. The Alagoda had his head up, dark, heavy laden eyes on his master, and 1 foot pawed at the ground. With his long tongue flaring out in the anticipatory beggar's show, he was ready for his treat bag. Daros made 3 clicking noises and then a sharp, short whistle, a signal the animal well understood. Ensnares started to place and snorted with his ears perked up and his hair all over bristled with excitement, including his bushy tail that flickered erratically. Pursuit run, if there was anything that could complete with eating to ensure it was running. Ready to run, boy? I know you are, Daros cooed as he came around the side to the dancing furred beast and fended off the insistent nuzzles and grunts it made, as well as saying, Get on already. at least long enough to tie its blanket rolls securely on the saddleback, with the grave ensures some vigorous pats on the head scratches. To achieve some semblance of palliation, the results that regard were dubious. But the results that regard were dubious. Inevitably, Daros had a whistle back to calm whistle, a bark, a command for stillness. Enough to put a boot in a stirrup and mount. He took firm grip of the reins initially, though ensnares were well trained and didn't break command. Nonetheless, he whined and tossed his head to show his anxiousness. Daros took all the last-second precautions in preparing for speed, ensuring nothing was a danger or of dropping off, such as a leather-encased hornbow, and securing his spear on his back as well strapped as with that he repeated his earlier command and squeezed his legs to reinforce it, while favoring the one side of the district, his mount on that direction. Ensnares took off down the slope, a terrain of no particular danger for him. He'd taken down thousands of times. He avoided the rocky bits, having memorized the locations. Daros kept hold of the reins just in case, but likelihood of needed the bitless mechanisms was minimal, despite the animal having been called spirited from an early age and rebellious against training headgear. Daros and he had quickly reached the understanding. He had never needed a bridle with a nose band down his long snout was enough to usually get to leg. The saddle pressure alone was sufficient. Keeping a hold of Dogmaker to increase his immediate awareness, Daros focused mostly on the route ahead of him down multiple ridges and declinations, while keeping ensnares from getting too reckless in his pace. A safe journey at haste would be 15 or 20 minutes to the fort. Most of that tempered seeds. Only a small stretch of later half of the route was straight, known as the Ridgeway. It sat between two slide ridges and a dandy dip that was frequently trafficked, ensures Ensnares could sprint his heart's content along. Chasing Azram behind the horizons was the elevation plunge. Daros led his eager companion down the slopes of rock, sand, and occasional patches of thorough shrubbery, severing occasionally from the bite of cold wind. Since they startled the bird into flight, the act they had done before to test Daros' archery at speed. And once Daros far sensed ground, briefly, either a lizard or a solitary wither, a later were not well tolerated in the canyon. Though a celerity was fairly benign, one of the arm-length worms moved in packs of dozens more, known as the writhing masses, which were opportunistic scavengers of sometimes dangerous boldness and not averse to attacking and devouring small children when food was scarce. Such an incident within the canyon a few years ago during a dry spell had terrified the community, and the Senate had issued a decree, the Azakon, to kill them on sight and patrol for populations. It was a sore spot for many hunters, as the creatures were stealthy, though plentiful and not appetizing. They only ate meat occasionally and fled often on cloverine. One of the only animals that did. It was rather toxic to most. Riders themselves were barely edible, but mostly the note of survival situations in case, while Daros might normally consider flushing whatever it was out by killing it, for food or custom, it had many matters of curiosity to see. As he crested a rise and caught light of the ridgeway, he also saw another rider kicking dust and speeding down straight from direction of Easthold. Sharpening his vision again with Makasota, he quickly scanned through the distinct tan blur of furs and wool. They recognized the bare, pale red face is that of Adra, the runner of Easthold. Atop her tan, speckled gray mount Spitter, they were possibly the fastest combination of Miracle Springs. Daros quickly had inserted speed in the rise, angling towards her rider, though soon enough he could tell he wouldn't actually be able to meet her when he was close enough. He slowed and stood up in his stirrups and waved to call out within her field of vision. A feat of balance, but child's play to his mind. Hail, Daryl shouted with his hands forming a cone around his mouth. What's the word, rider? Immediately he formed Marasoka around his ear, amplifying the sounds. The beat of tough Agola foot pads on the sand and the creaks of leather. The distant dins of activity, the whistle of the winds came rushing to his perception, and he attuned the damp it down almost subconsciously. Injured blue hand, she shouted back as she raced, getting a healer. With that, Daros was approaching. Only the dust he left in her wake. She flew down the straight, which could carry her almost all the way to the center. She was slow for a healthy decline, but the hospital was her destination. Would be another straight shot until the walls of the base of Bloodhound Bluff. A blue hand, Daros sat down and saddled as he approached the straight, pondering the matter. It was strange. While they were inaudibly due, it was maybe 12 days of travel to many sand. If the rider was injured and racing to Easthold, the incident was most certainly be insistent inside or near the canyon. If he had to guess, most likely the cause of was Ornacid running in and commonly called down-feathers netherbirds or some variation outside hunter circles. They were flightless feathered birds like reptiles that hunted in packs and could slay a Agola cattle like the four-horn. Even Himalayan such as herself with ease. He killed a starving one during a dry spell. Chanced to hear him stalk him successfully and ambushed it from the height. With a lucky loosing of his bow, his feet of life. He wore its teeth around his neck. Its unique red and white tail feathers were tied to his hair. Its skin had been used for a belt with all flew other elements, but weren't his person worn daily. A few he made gifts of. A corsinid was common kill. They tended to shy away from large communities, despite that deaths of their predation happened on some date was this very calendar, usually to the raging of for hunting, scouting, trade, and so forth. Travelers, caravaneers were most in danger, but those guards necessarily to combat bandits would tend to be more than enough to persuade attacks, but risky gamblets or incompetence certainly occurred to claim lives time and again. He was all he could do without judgment until he could see the matter. He leaned down closer to Insar's neck and applied pressure to his legs. Forward, the more or less tell the Agola to sprint. The animal was all too ready to do so, bounding down the ridgeway as fast as his feet could carry him, head down and ears flat. The world sped by, and Daros opted to drop his goggles down due to the dust Aradia had whipped up. though it was slightly too dark for smoggy lenses. He was at least riding towards the east of the brighter horizon. Within minutes it was over, and Daros had given the reins a little flick to ease the beast out of his focused state. Hennessis obeyed, if reluctantly, snorting sharply once in that Daros imagined was desertion, and soon he slowed to a canter, and Daros angled him off the straight, pushing his goggles back on his head. Let's see. Off his head, Daros gradually slowed his mount as the terrain grew rougher. Beyond the natural break of the ridge, Easthold's brick face together could be seen, though the walls of the fort were obscured. They traversed the final decline to the fort, in which was suddenly steep and made for slow going, with ridge lines once again on either side of the path. One of the ridge lines held some elevation even to the edge of the cliffs beyond this, and this was where the watchtower had closely set walls were postponed. Sharply down one of its slopes was a walkable extension of the wall, which crossed over one of the easily traversed paths of the canyon and the river bottom for many kilometers in discretion in either direction. The wall determined across from it up another high cliff, acting as a sort of cup shape for a wall over the path, which included a portcullis gate made of great cane painted black. A sentry atop the watchtower caught sight of him. They exchanged waves slightly. Was far to try shouting out anything. Avoiding the path to the watchtower entirely, Daros dismounted. He neared the open portcullis gate. He didn't see the guard immediately, so he just passed on through its wide interior, leading Enstris by the reins. Soon after passing it, he could see down the wide canyon slopes to Snaking River was gradually thinned and died into a muddy tarn that some distance past the point where he could begin to zigzag climb up the pass. Unfortunately, the river was not so wide as to prevent access on its banks. He could make out a man sprawled on the ground, seemingly unmoving, as the crowd of Akazon huddled around him. They were clothed in swirls of tan, all well camouflaged with the terrain spoiled by the red faces and long hair of the white or pale purple gray. The Vaetian and keeper of Easthold, Lecco, was there taking on the others. A blood-soaked Agola was near by them, legs and lower snout in the water. "Hail there, hunter!" Daros and his both jumped above and behind them. Daros turned with his left to see the Azakon warrior perched at the top of the wall between the two Marylians, legs dangling, and also watched the scene beyond the canyon. The position explained why he wasn't invisible upon approach. Daros certainly didn't expect him to be there. His far sense had subconsciously been minimized, as it was proper to training when not needed, and so the warrior had been annoyingly outside the radius of detection. The only thing that typically marked the warrior for other Azakon was the hard leather helms dyed the bloody purple known as Godberry. Tilio, the young man Daros regarded above him, didn't have on his head, but hanging back on his neck, which was quite typical. Mostly the only training or war would have ever seen them donning such implements and wielding their shields. Daros had never seen a war come to Miracle Springs, however. Talo wore a bored, sheepy expression,